Hello! Today, as a follow-up from my last video, I'm going to be talking a little bit about being a teaching assistant or a TA. It's going to be a lot less constructive this time and a lot more thoughts and feelings because wow, do I have a lot. In general, as a job, being a TA has been the most amount of responsibility I've ever had and the least amount of training. What I thought being a TA would be like is very different from what it actually is. Part of this is because I went to a different school for my graduate studies, which have a very different approach to teaching introductory level courses. Let me explain. So in my undergraduate degree, the way that it worked is that all of the 100 and 200 level, like very intro level courses that tend to have more people in the class and are just very like lecture based, we had a seminar section. So every week you would meet with a group of people from your big course with a TA, and you would have a little like session to delve deeper into the material, the text, the concept. I was so excited to be a graduate student because I wanted to be a TA so badly because for me, I was like, oh, this is like practice for being a prof. You know what I'm saying? Like I was like, oh, so into it. I thought about the different types of activities and like learning tools that I'd want to bring into a class. Okay, I was out here writing a pedagogy manifesto in my head, like I was ready for it. Got to my new university and it turns out that is not at all how they ran their undergraduate courses. They do not do the seminar thing with the TAs at all. So what I had been primarily so excited for was like FaceTime with students and being able to actually like engage and help them learn. And then my school said, no, that is not what we do here. Instead of having a department-wide kind of model for the role of a TA, the way that the TAs were used in class time was so much up to the discretion of the professor that you work for, which is the primary thing that I wish undergraduate students knew. In my contract as a teaching assistant, there are a certain amount of hours that I'm allowed to work a week. Within those hours, it is up to the professor to decide how they use that labor. In my first year of being a TA, which was my first year of my master's program when I was also doing my courses, I had two completely opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of experiences. One semester, what the prof decided to do was, instead of me holding regular office hours, being expected to do the readings, or being in the class at all, the professor chose to use my hours of work to only grade for the entire class all the assignments. This meant that instead of kind of spreading out the time throughout the semester and actually being involved in the course, the professor was choosing to basically save up all my hours for the weeks when assignments were due. This led to so many issues. Let's unpack them. Not being in the course created a lot of problems because you're not involved in the class at all. Didn't know that the professor was doing things like giving them like midterm questions and stuff ahead of time so that they could write responses, and then students would bring them to the prof and then the prof could be like, yeah, looks good, you'll do fine. When I was the one who was doing all of the grading. In the same vein, I was also made out to be a bad cop of sorts in that the professor was a very kind of engaging and friendly lecturer, which is great for students. But then when that's the image that's presented to the students and then to the TA when they are very intense about having like a decently low grade point average, to fit in with the university or the department's kind of standard for the GPA of those level of courses, which is always something to keep in mind, but was pretty intense about it, and gave me incredibly weird arbitrary rubrics to base off on so that the average would always be quite low. So then what happened is on my course evaluations, it was kind of half and half, where half of the students, and I'm assuming mostly the students who came and actually talked to me so I could like really go through their feedback and grades and stuff, because I was having to stick to these such weird arbitrary things that I was doing my best to justify them by giving really in-depth feedback. Also because I think it's important to be really, I guess, more intense and involved in grading like 200, 100 level courses, because like that's where you set them up for the rest of their degree. Half of the feedback I got on my course evaluation was positive, and then the other half was that I was never in class, I graded too hard, this kind of stuff. And it was just so frustrating to read, because I was like, if it were up to me, I would have been in that class every single day, right? But it's not my choice. So just, students, please keep in mind that although there are some TAs that just suck, okay, I'm not saying that I'm not defending all TAs, but in general, just be aware of the fact that the way that the TA's labor is used is up to the professor. Something that I was also up against is that I have only ever TA'd for sessional instructors, because they're often hired to do the introductory courses that other people don't want to teach. But the problem with sessionals is that they're paid like nothing. They have such a low salary. Universities are wild in terms of salary disparity levels anyway. They get paid almost nothing. So they're often working a few different gigs in order to make it work. And then there can be kind of the desire to just shove everything off onto the TA. But then they also want to make students happy and can undermine the TA's grading, because both are trying to balance getting positive course feedback and then also meeting departmental guidelines. So I do understand that there's a larger issue at work, but I've also had experiences with sessionals that were the complete opposite. So it's not just because of that. For instance, in the next semester, I had a completely different involvement in the class. I was considered to be basically a co-instructor. Part of the way that my hours were used included me being in every single class, being given course materials, helping the prof design some of the assignments as well as the evaluation materials in terms of like grading rubrics, like just completely different opposite experience. To backtrack a bit to the training aspect of it, in my experience, basically what I was told was just like, don't be exploited. It's good that they're very aware of the fact that TAs are in a position where they're often exploited, but it was not very helpful if you've never worked as a TA to just say like, don't get exploited with like no other context. Like I didn't realize how bad I had it in my like first semester, especially when I went into my second semester and had the much better experience, right? So just not helpful at all. Also, I dealt with so many ethical issues like right away as a TA. There's a lot of ethical gray areas in the line of work. Something that is never, for me, in my experience, was like never discussed is how absolutely wild it is to, when you are in the split classes, like I discussed in my other video, you will for sure either be in a course with someone you have previously TA'd or are currently TAing. There are a few issues that arise when dealing with that kind of a situation. One, it can just be really awkward and uncomfortable to be classmates with somebody that you have TA'd. On the one hand, it also just undermines your credibility as a TA, because you are being presented as if you are like classmates and on the same level of learning as you are with the students that you are helping to instruct, which is wild. Another issue too is that often if I was like in a class with somebody that I was currently like TAing them in another class, my solution was often to just like make it very clear that I would not be grading their assignments, which I think is a pretty like common solution to that. I found that sometimes the students would try to reach out to me to get a lot of insight into the class we were taking together as classmates, which was also weird because although yes, it's fine to like engage with classmates, there's like already that weird kind of power and boundary dynamic, because I'm not being paid to take extra time to explain things to you as my classmate. To drill down a little deeper into the issue of grading, even though I was given like basically zero instruction on pedagogy at all, a lot of the things that I was considering when I was grading were, especially when last year when it was like mostly in person learning, was that a lot of the like midterms and stuff, it's all like handwritten, right? So when grading, a lot of the stuff that I noticed that I needed to really check myself for was like handwriting. And I think there is a bias towards people with like neater and nicer handwriting. But that like is definitely an issue of accessibility a lot of the time. And also people's just like relationship to school. It's also very gendered. Also thinking about things like grammar and phrasing and how, you know, learning how to write in an academic way is really important. How hard should you be, especially if you know that like a decent contingent of your class is like ELL or English as a learned language, probably like their second, third, fourth language. I found grading so difficult, especially last year when I was also like in classes writing assignments and getting grades back, and then also at the same time grading other students' assignments because I felt for them so deeply and I wanted to be so like just and as fair as I could and like just sympathize with them so deeply, maybe too much. But it's just like a very weird position to be in. To go back to course evaluations. Okay, so as an undergraduate student, I did find them really useful because they made me feel like I had some kind of voice or some kind of say or a way to talk to the professor, especially if there were things I didn't agree with in terms of how certain like issues were framed, how certain things were dealt with in class. Being on the receiving end of course evaluations, however, is totally different. So especially when you consider that it has been proven that course evaluations and even like Rate My Professor, even if not intentionally, there are misogynistic and racist, etc. outcomes of those kinds of feedback models, and that there is very clear preference given to largely white men profs and lecturers, and there was very specific kinds of language placed on literally everybody else. So as a tool, I'm torn because on the one hand, again, in my experiences as a student, I was like, hi, hello, I want some kind of feedback model. But given how much of a fucking garbage fire it can be, also, I feel like we need something new. You know what I'm saying? We need some other kind of feedback model because this doesn't work, especially when you consider the consequences of it. It's used to like continue contracts and like as basis for nominating people for awards and stuff. But my advice for students, especially in terms of course evaluations, is to not wait until course evaluations to air your grievances necessarily. Since I had people say like, I didn't understand her grading. And I was like, oh my God, if you had just come and talked to me, I could have explained it to you. I could have given you clarification. Like, it does not benefit anybody, like you or the TA or professor even, to hold on to like really specific issues until the course eval. There's also a much larger conversation to be had about the way that universities rely and thus often exploit graduate student and sessional instructor, which often overlap, labor. And like I've mentioned previously, the wild amount of wage disparities in universities as an institution. Also, the way that TAs and RAs, research assistants, are treated varies vastly university to university, at least in Canada. When it comes to TA organizing and solidarity, I do recommend sharing salaries. Kind of like any other workplace, I think that stuff is really important. But thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye!